Morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get going right now. So welcome to Bible class. We're reading the Bible in a year. So just to kind of like recap what we read this week, just kind of few of the verses that we had. So we were in First Chronicles, we were in First Kings, Second Samuel, and we were also had a multitude of Psalms that we were kind of looking over. So we're kind of going into David's life the last couple weeks, kind of going into what he did, and we kind of see the seasons that he lives in. So similarly, Texas has many seasons. Texas has many seasons. So we start out with winter, then we have fall, fake spring, then we get more winter. We get spring of deception where we think it's spring, but it really isn't. Then we get the Easter spell, which is really nice. We get the pollination. If you have a black car, you know what I mean. Then we have actual spring. We have summer. Then we have what is called hell's front porch. Then we have false fall. Then we have second summer. And then we have actual fall. So if anybody that's lived here long enough knows that we kind of going into that. We are here, about right here. So we're coming into the summer months, but we kind of have to look at the seasons that David kind of went through. So the seasons that David went through in his life. So just to kind of name a few, we have the young David, him being a shepherd boy. We have David beating Goliath. We have David and King Saul. We have David and Jonathan. We have King David. We have David and Bathsheba. We have David as a father. We have David the poet. And we have David's death. We're here. So we're kind of coming to the end of David's reign. We're kind of coming into it where he is actually on his last leg, and he is currently trying to sort out his affairs. So let's open it up with our first question. So how did David's last act in the Psalms tied to his life help us think about finishing well? I remember in high school, I was an athlete. I played football, but I was not an athlete. Wouldn't consider me as much. So what happened is that I was really good at showing up. I was really good at going through the motions. I was really good at getting everything done. I was not a very active player. In this situation, my coaches really liked me because I finished well. I always finished. Didn't matter how long it took me, I always finished. So how does that kind of reflect to David, wherever he's finishing his life?
He started laying out plans, right, for Solomon and stuff, setting a plate stand in sports, setting a playbook.
Yeah.
Hand to hand off. Yeah. And then the opposite of that is we don't want to develop a hit list.
Yeah.
Develop this hit list that we talk about.
Right? Yeah. And it kind of talks about this week as well. So what happens first? Before David dies, he's feeble old man. He can't keep warm. It was very specific in the Bible that he couldn't keep warm, and that he had to have round the clock watch because of his just meek and feeble self. What happens during that time period? Who kind of tries to come into power? Which one? Adonijah. Adonijah tries to come into power, but who is supposed to be coming into power? Solomon. So Solomon's supposed to be coming into power. Adonijah kind of declares himself king. My dad's feeble. He's old. Let's out with the old, in with the new. He kind of coronates himself as king over everything. What's the problem with that? That's not God's plan. So his whole plan was to have Solomon. So how does his last act of him saying, hey, Adonijah is not king, Solomon is king, make this story finishing well?
Well, he made sure everybody knew he wanted Solomon on the throne.
Yeah.
He publicly had him anointed, publicly set him on the throne. And there could be no question about who was gonna rule.
Yeah. What about his Psalms kind of going into this? He wrote many Psalms. Does anybody know how many Psalms David wrote? Bible quiz for the day. He wrote 75. So there's 150. He wrote 75, so he wrote half of them. So what does that tell you about David?
Very expressive with his thoughts and emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And before he died, he called all his people in and told them what all he wanted done. He specifically gave Solomon a set of instructions. Pretty much like I'm preparing for my son. And there are things you should do, and there are things you should not do. That's an important thing for old people to do. This is what you should do. This is what I expect of you.
Yeah. So he's kind of like a mentorship. Where have we seen this before? Kind of backtracking. I'm sorry, what? Moses? Who else before that?
Jacob.
Yeah, who else before that? Abraham. So that was the one I was looking for, but we got some really good ones where we're kind of laying out. There seems to be this kind of retelling where someone's about to die and they kind of huddle up everybody and they say, hey, this is what I want you to do. And we kind of see these Psalms as a window into David, kind of him peeking out and showing him who he is. And we're kind of seeing it through that lens about who David is. Not necessarily who David was, but in his own heart. Because he did some bad things, just like all of us have, but we're seeing the true lens through these Psalms. So let's go to this first question we got here. What stands out about David preparing Solomon and the people before he dies? What was the big thing that stood out to you?
Get the temple.
Get the temple built. Why was that important?
Didn't think it was right that God lives in the tent, he lives in the palace.
Yep.
So the palace for God.
From his Psalms, I got that he wanted to make sure people knew to exalt God,
Mm-hmm.
that he is the king, that he is the refuge, and he is the one to follow.
Yep.
Apparently might have said this earlier, I couldn't tell, but he was without mercy on anyone who opposed him.
Yep.
God would take their lives and just run over them.
Yeah. We kind of see this happen like where we have someone on their deathbed and they're kind of giving out a list of instructions. David's first instruction was to Solomon, and it was when the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. I am about to go the way of all the world, he said, so be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him and keep his decree and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and whenever you go. Those some good final words to your son when you die. What else did he say? There was the whole strike down my enemies. Here's a list of everything I need you to do. So he started out giving advice to his son. What advice have you given your son or daughter?
Don't irritate your mother.
Don't irritate your mother. What else? What kind of advice when we're about to go? What's the last thing you want to say to them?
Stay in the Lord.
Stay in the Lord. Which is ultimately what David's doing is stay with the Lord, follow the regulations, follow the rules.
Because it's funny, not funny is not the right word, but the repetition, right, as we all know what's getting ready to happen the next 300 to 400 years. Solomon did that, but the people, we ignored it again and paid for it. So it's the same reminders we talked about, and God's people ignored it and destroyed him.
Yeah.
More on that later.
Anybody else? What's one of the last things you want to say to your kids? God first. You know, my dad told me a long time ago, I think it was as a way to kind of keep me from getting into trouble. He told me that every single time I do something, it reflects on him because we share the same last name. And so anytime I get into trouble, if anytime I do something, it reflects on him. And he's trying to teach me to go the right way. So anytime that we try to make these decisions, I feel like that's what David's right here is everything that you do is going to reflect upon me. I did these things. I need you to do what God wants. Let's go to our second question here. So, how do the Psalms in this week express both deep dependence on God and confidence in his kingship? Now, I pulled a few verses out of here to kind of express this because there's so many Psalms in this verse. I think there's 35 Psalms that we went through this week. Which one kind of expresses both dependence on God and confidence in his kingship?
Continually gives praise, recognition, how majestic you are, Lord. I mean, many times he starts off giving praise and recognition to God. First thing I thought of.
Yeah. Does he always do that?
Sometimes it's the opposite, from an anguish and despair and why me?
Yeah, because there's multiple different types of Psalms. There's some where he's lamenting, where he's kind of coming from this moment of sadness, like what's going on. Then we have a hymn, which is more of a praise to God. And we have multiple other different types of Psalms that kind of go along with it. So in these readings that we've been doing, which one kind of expresses both the dependence on him?
Psalm 23,
Psalm 23.
41.
We're just naming out numbers now. 7. So the whole thing with the Psalms is that we kind of see, like I said earlier, we kind of see a window into David's heart, kind of understanding what he wants and what God is doing for him. So we look at Psalm 27. So this is verses 1 through 3. So the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. Why is he so confident?
You know, God's in charge on his side. If God is for us, who can be against us?
God's for us. Who could be against us?
On page 555, you have preserved my life because I am innocent.
Is David innocent?
So that's the whole point with these Psalms is that we're kind of seeing a window into David's real heart. Yeah.
One of my favorite songs is 51, and that's where he talks about everything that he did, with Bathsheba.
Yeah.
He says, but, restore me to the joy of my salvation. Don't take your Holy Spirit from me.
Yeah.
Those are, that was his relationship with the Lord is absolutely always there, even when he messed up. And I think it's a real lesson for us because what he does is he talks about how God is with him and God's going to take care of the enemies and God's going to take care of this, but he also lays himself out there
Mm-hmm.
and confesses all these things constantly.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why he stayed, why that closeness and that intimacy
Mhm.
grew so much and stayed so long, stayed throughout his life.
Yeah.
even when you get some horrible things.
Yeah. So when the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. So David had a lot of enemies. So why is he so confident?
He saw it in his life that God gave him the victories over the giants, over the different nations. God was there and giving him the victory.
Was God always by David's side?
Not only sin.
Yeah.
But he still sent Nathan to say, hey, you messed up.
Yeah. And it,
And so God loved David enough to send him a messenger to say you messed up. And David's heart was such that he repented and mourned his sin.
yeah. So kind of going along with that is that as adults and we have kids and it's us, we always have mentors. And we always have things that are going to happen. So Nathan was with David and always was calling him out on things that he did. Does everybody need a mentor? Yeah. So I've had many mentors over the life. Right now, I have a teaching mentor who kind of comes and checks up on me and makes sure I'm doing okay, kind of encourages me a little bit. I've had my dad. I've had multiple coaches over the years. I've had teacher friends who have been helping me learn how to teach and try to perfect the craft. What does that say about God's mentorship?
God is the ultimate mentor. And I know that sounds stupid, but
Yep.
he's the ultimate mentor, and he couldn't get up with other people.
Yeah. And we see this through all these Psalms, and we see the progression that it goes through in trying to see who David really is. So let's go to our next part here. So, what do we learn about prayer, fear, and trust from these Psalms?
I learned that we can talk to God about anything and everything. If I'm angry, or if I'm depressed, or if I'm afraid, anything I can talk to God about. I can express any emotion to my Father God.
Mm-hmm. Frustration, fear, anything? So let's take a look at one of the Psalms that I picked out. So I picked out Psalm 17, and I'm going to read the whole thing if you want to follow along with me. But this one kind of starts out kind of like with our first thing, is like talking about prayer. So he says here, hear me, Lord, my plea is just, listen to my cry, hear my prayer. So he kind of goes out, here is what's going on. I need to pray to you. So it does not rise from deceitful lips. Let my vindication come from you. May your eyes see what is right. Though you probe my heart, though you examine me at night and test me, you will find that I have planned no evil. My mouth has not transgressed. Though people tried to bribe me, I have kept myself from the ways of the violent through what your lips have commanded. So he's saying that I'm listening to you, even though I'm dealing with all these things, I'm still staying true to you. My steps have held to your paths. My feet have not stumbled. I call on you, my God, for you will answer me. Turn your ear to me and hear my prayer. Show me the wonders of your great love. You who save by your right hand those who take refuge in you from their foes. Keep me as the apple of your eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings. From the wicked who are out to destroy me, from the mortal enemies who surround me. They close up their callous hearts, and their mouths speak with arrogance. They have tracked me down. They now surround me with eyes alert to throw me to the ground. They are like lion hungry for prey. Like a fierce lion crouching in cover, rise up, Lord, confront them, bring them down with your sword, rescue me from their wicked. By your hand, save me from such people, Lord, from those of this world whose reward is in this life. May what you have stored up for the wicked fill their bellies. May their children gorge themselves on it, and may there be leftovers for the little ones. As for me, I will be vindicated and will see your face. When I awake, I will be satisfied with seeing your likeness. So we have a prayer here, and he's praying for all that is wrong to be stopped. He even aggresses it, he even kind of shows it as lions kind of crouching, ready to pounce on him. And he knows that God will vindicate him and will help him. So is this a good example of a prayer? So he's praying for all these things. And then we look at another verse in Psalms 22, where this is more of, instead of a prayer, this is talking about fear. So, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer by night, but I find no rest. So we went through pretty confident right there. We went from pretty confident that this is going to happen to, why have you forsaken me? What happened between those Psalms?
David is still a human. And although we can have great faith and great confidence there, you know, things can shake us and all of a sudden we can feel very alive.
Yeah. So we're talking about seasons kind of coming through. We're in a different season here because we're seeing David at one point saying, I am confident that you are going to take care of this. And then in another verse, we're dealing with someone who obviously who's lost some confidence in himself. Yeah.
You know, one thing I think about when I look at that is, remember when he, you know, when like a king would die, he would say, let's be nice to those people, let's be kind to those people, let's try, you know, let's, even though this guy's an enemy. But then, they always invariably turn them.
Yeah.
They work what they kind of ethic. So David started out with each one of those times, trying to do the right thing, trying to do the good thing. But then the enemies came after him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that has to be very hard when you're trying to, in almost every case, except for the time he murdered and had adultery and all the those things. He had most of the time, he started out in according to God's plan.
Yeah.
He wanted to do what God wanted him to do. But things happened.
Yeah.
And those things dashed his spirit, you know, his hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he might have been writing one when he's in a cave hiding for his life, or writing after he had a victory, just like somebody said, at different seasons in our
Yeah.
lives. Just like poetry, a painter, when someone paints, when someone, yeah.
And look at the respect he had for Saul.
Yeah.
Saul was chosen by God. And he still was good to Saul, even though Saul tried to kill him, he tried to get everybody else to kill him, he tried, you know, everything.
Yeah.
But he still respected him even after his death.
Yeah.
He still showed respect because it was God's chosen.
Yeah. Because I feel like even the most godly people have these seasons where they have doubts, or they have these things where David, a man after God's own heart, as it said, is not only confident in one season, he may be unconfident in a different season. That fear is kind of taking over. And we kind of see this multiple times throughout the Bible, which we're going to be reading, is that there's not only David, there's actual prophets of the Lord who are like, hey, I don't know what's happening. You're telling me to do this, But this is happening. We can see that in Habakkuk. We can see that in, I think, Amos. You can see in all these minor prophets where they're going to have the doubts as well. So what does that tell us?
That we're not, excuse me, that we're not unusual. We're not alone. I mean, because I often look at Christians who seem like super Christians and always joyful, always happy, always seem like they have it together. And for me personally, that's intimidating because it's like they don't seem like they ever have doubt.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, and I know that I don't want to sound bad, but sometimes to know that they do have doubts makes you feel more okay.
Yeah. Does this make you feel more okay to know that David, of all people, up until this point? Yeah. And that's kind of where we're kind of relating. And then also the fear that he has is that he's confident in one and then he's fearful in this one. What's he most afraid of?
Forgetting him.
God forgetting him. I feel like that's where his fear is that not that he's not, that he is leaving him out. What did I do? I feel like that's where a lot of fear comes from, is that we're forgotten. Let's
Well, I
look,
think that's
yeah.
what I appreciate about all of these Psalms, and as we've read about David's life, and, we hear multiple times, David was a man after God's own heart, and we see the heart of David in these Psalms. And kind of like what Ronnie was saying earlier, there are some of these Psalms this week that I read and I kind of chuckled a little bit because David says, I'm innocent, God. I'm like, what are you talking about? You're innocent. You arranged somebody for somebody's death, right? You stole somebody's wife, but yet we see, and I think that just speaks to us as humans, right? How often do we see the news and headlines and we see like, oh, that person's a hypocrite because of XYZ that's happened. But yet we see here, like, this is the human experience of the seasons that happen. And we see David crying out to God. And he says he knows that God is there for him at times. And he is confident in that. And then he cries out in anguish the next. But ultimately, we see like that is what it means for us to live this life and be human. That sometimes we're going to be on the mountaintop and sometimes we're going to be in the valley. And that's okay. And God is there at every turn of the way.
David was also confident that when he asked God for forgiveness, God forgave him and saw him as innocent. Because we look at David and say that you are not innocent. I mean, not as bad as me, but you're not innocent. But then he says, but I'm innocent. And he's innocent because he knows God has forgiven him.
Because we can all sit here and be like, oh, I'm innocent. I've never done anything wrong. Oh, that was just, we're going to forget that. We're just going to pass by that that's just the Cliff Notes part of it. But we ultimately see, like I said, into this window. So let's look at this last one. In you, Lord my God, I put my trust. I trust in you. Do not let me be put to shame, nor let my enemies triumph over me. So we see that again. We see the prayer. We see the fear. And now we're back into it. We're just a few Psalms later. In God, Lord my God, I put my trust. And we're trusting in Lord. One person always told, I heard this a long time ago, I don't know who said it, but to truly show, the true definition of love is allowing someone to completely destroy you and trusting that they won't. So anytime you build a relationship with somebody, you are telling very personal things. You're giving them everything and trusting that they will not destroy you. So what can we learn about God in putting all of our trust in all of our selves as someone who sees what we do, yet forgives us? So what do we see? Where do we see the love in that? Where we have someone who can completely destroy us, but is trusting that they won't when it comes to our relationship with God.
mercy and grace.
Yeah,
Personally.
yeah. Because at any point, God could have taken David out. He's done it for a lot less. Why did David live?
Because he had potential.
He had potential.
And I mean, you think that, God's destroyed other people for a lot less, like
Yeah.
people who touched the ark, whatever, stumbling, different things that people did, but, they probably, I mean, didn't have the heart for God, obviously.
Yeah.
So David has potential to be the person that set an example for others.
Anybody else on that?
God, of course, knows and he knows us, but he saw the sincerity there.
Did he have a plan for David that we didn't realize yet? Or even he didn't realize yet? Yeah.
That's what I was gonna say, when I wanna overanalyze, and I do sometimes, why God, then it goes back to, I think like we talked about Job, I don't know, I don't understand any of it, it's not for me to understand. It's for God to understand the big picture, and I have to remind myself of it.
Yeah. Just go ahead.
In later years, as you get older, you have a tendency to reflect on your life. And sometimes we probably have a little difficulty forgiving some of the things we may have done. And I'm wondering if some of his struggles are his past,
Yeah.
because he definitely has trust in God. So where does the fear really come from?
Yeah. And I know I have trouble putting things down and putting it in a box and forgetting about it. And I kind of dwell on things quite a bit. And through these Psalms, we kind of see David not only in confidence, in that trusting, in that prayer, opening up to God, saying, this is what I need from you. Then saying fear, where we are ultimately saying, hey, I don't know what's going on. Why are you not here with me? Why are you not there? And then we have the trust, where it's saying, I trust in you.
I think what God does, what he does in the case of David, when I'm praying, he does it in the case of me. It is that deal, fear category, but what I think he does is he looks at our whole body of work. And some of the things in the past that we've done, they're horrible. He's already forgiven, so he's erased those from our book of life. We forgive.
Yeah.
And he does not. And so he looks on at the next things we did, at the next stage, and how we held on, and how we trusted, and how we obeyed him. And then he looks at that entire body of work. When I think that is the thing that he saw his heart. And he knew that for the most part, that David had been trusting and had loyal with him.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's the part.
Yeah. And I wish I could sit here and say that I trusted everything that was going on. Because my life has been kind of tumultuous whenever it comes to my job, switching careers, going through all the things. So where does that trust come from? How do you sit there and say, I trust with everything I got? It's not something that happens overnight. It comes with practice.
One of the things that helps me do that is looking back on them and realizing I've been in some very scary, very difficult places, and God has never forsaken me. God has genuinely worked all things for my good, no matter how terrified I was, no matter how out of control I felt. And he always worked things. And recognizing that helps me realize that he will work through this. That, it doesn't completely dispel the fear, but it calms.
Are we ever going to be truly without fear? No. I always tell people, if you don't know, I used to be an animal control officer for many years. And I used to tell people, they're like, how do you not be afraid of dogs? You just don't. You're built with it or you're not. You're going to have that fear. And people always ask me, how do you just go into it? I had many police officers who said, I would rather go to bank robberies, domestic violence cases. I would rather go to murder suspects, anything than deal with dogs.
My nephew was a dog handler
Yeah.
in Lions home on leave one time. And there was a neighborhood husky terrorizing his little sisters and other neighborhood kids. And he looked at his dad and he said, I got this. He walked outside, slowly walked up to the dog doing this. And when he got close, he hit him right in the nose. He actually gave the dog a bloody nose. When he came back, and the dog ran off. And Ben said he never terrorized the kids again. But when he came back in, Ben asked James, he said, weren't you afraid of getting bit? And James said, no. And he said, how did you know the dog wasn't going to bite you? He said, well, I didn't. He said, well, you said you weren't afraid of getting bit. He said, Dad, I'm a dog handler. I get bit every day.
Yeah.
Ben was like, you know, that was a hard for him to put together.
Yeah.
Put together more clearly. It may happen to me. I'm just not afraid of it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was an old joke. One of my police officer friends told me, he's like, I had a buddy on the bomb squad. I asked, is it ever nerve-wracking to defuse bombs? And he said, no, it's either I'm going to defuse the bomb or it's no longer my problem. and I kind of was like, oh, okay, that's good.
Yeah. But that confidence comes with practice. And it's just like our ability to face those trials comes, you know, with practice. You know, and I say that to mean, you know, we've learned, we've heard these stories, we've heard how God's true. You know, as we've grown up, we've been able to read for ourselves how God is never changing and he's always there and he's always true. And when it gets rattled, you know, when your faith is challenged, you will go back to what you have learned. You know, there's an old saying that, you know, people train because in crisis, you will go back to your level of training.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can think, oh, well, I'll do this and I'll do that. But it's what you've learned to do is how you will address that in times of crisis. And so that's how we can face those things.
Well, I think to Brad's point too, we see this in David in the seasons of his life and in the writing of the Psalms, right? This is the same David who, as a boy, standing up against Goliath, said, well, the Lord has delivered me from the lion, from, you know, and so who is he, like, who is this uncircumcised Philistine standing against, like, so David has seen all of these things. He's reflected on them in his heart. And so and we get, again, a picture of it in the writing of these Psalms. To your point, it has been practiced. And we see the theme again in the New Testament when we get there, when we see the parable of the talents and how, you know, to whom much is given, much is expected, right? If you do what you can with what God has given you in that practice, you are given more. And so I think we see this lived out in the life of David. This was a shepherd boy who was the youngest of his family, tending sheep, who God elevated to be king of Israel through those repetitions of trusting in him over and over again.
So this is where that trust kind of comes into play, is that are we going to sit here and basically do the worry, or are we going to put the trust in that needs to happen? So this leads me to my final question. How does the transition from David to Solomon picture both continuality and the change in God's plan?
Say that again?
So how does the transition from David to Solomon picture both continuity and change in God's plan? Continuity, my bad. I cannot read very well.
We all know what you mean.
Yeah,
I think we see the continuity with David doing passing his wisdom on us all.
Yeah.
Like, do this, walk in God's plan, obey his commands. So I think we see at least David's intention for Solomon to continue leading Israel in God. That's happening, sort of, right?
Yeah. Yeah, partial credit. Happens all the time. I will allow it.
I'm not sure what you're trying to get us to think about on changing God's plan.
Yeah.
God had planned for the transition, so I don't know if it was a change of leadership. But it was still part of God's plan,
Yeah.
in a period of peace for a time.
Yeah.
Solomon was the right one, so anyway.
Yeah. So there was, we go from David to Solomon. Was there a change in the plan? How so?
He did not want David to build his house because he had blood on his hands from all the battles that he had done. And Solomon didn't have that, and so he allowed David to prepare to build the temple, but he actually allowed Solomon to build the temple. So I can't explain why, but that is one change. The continuity that I see is kind of I don't know if you call it chutzpah or just whatever the personal thing is. It's Solomon did not do everything according to what God wanted him to do it. So I think they both had some type of human pull, or, Solomon made deals with whoever for the cedar and had slaves. I say slaves, but I'm saying he worked the people really hard, probably harder than what God really wanted. And these are all smatterings of things that I've heard and listened to, and it's hard to bring it all back. But basically, neither one of them did everything exactly as God wanted, but there's obviously grace and forgiveness there, just like there is for all of us. So I'll just leave it at that. But
Yeah.
That's the change in the continuity that I see.
Okay.
All the things that in the Old Testament that say you're not supposed to do, Solomon did them all, had multiple wives, served their gods, whatever.
Yeah.
So,
and we're going to
list the three things, whatever it was.
Yeah, and we got a lot, and with Solomon coming in, we're actually going to go more into that next week about Solomon coming into power. But what can we say about Solomon now, as him becoming king?
Well, at least at this point, Solomon was relatively false.
What?
Relatively.
Relatively.
And he's not who the people would expect, right? Let's go back to that concept again, too, is for all intents and purposes, people looking at a typical succession is, well, that's not who would normally followed, which is, to me, is part of the continuity of God's plan. God continually just continues to overturn what people expect to happen on who should and should not be in charge.
Like no way a youngest son, shepherd boy, would become king, right? Or the fourth son.
Right. First of all, start out and fight Goliath, really?
I think Solomon was David's great hope. He was the good boy. He was the good young man. And when God asked him, I'll give you anything you want, he says, I just won't miss it. And I think, Solomon is not depicted as a warrior. He just, but he had great wealth that kind of led him astray, but he was I believe Solomon was a good king. I believe Solomon was blessed by God. And I believe that this is a transition from the bloody wars of David to the more peaceful time and rule of Solomon. That's the transition.
Yeah. And who was Solomon's mother? Bathsheba. So what does that say about this whole kind of roundabout story with Bathsheba, him committing a very big sin, having not only that, but also having her husband killed, Uriah? And just like you said, this isn't the first pick.
First son they conceived was killed, as punishment
Yeah.
for the act. And, and Solomon, I think, David was concerned about the temple being rebuilt.
Mhm.
For himself. I think the plan that God had was so totally different because he wanted, Solomon to do that. And I think he empowered him with all this wisdom so that he could do, great things on the, as the leader there. He messed up in a lot of ways, Solomon did.
Yeah.
But in the plan that God had for him to do about the temple, and also in some of the judgments that he made, for judgment calls and everything he made, he really did an outstanding job. It's just things of the world.
Yeah.
Like, intervened in.
Yeah. And I feel like the whole story with Bathsheba is told from this lens is because coming from this sin, from this adultery, from the killing, eventually we have Solomon. So does this mean that just because you sin one time that good things can't come from something?
I think it was kind of a reward to Bathsheba for all that she went through, we kind of look at her as a bad person, but she really was a victim,
Yeah.
And I think to her, it was like, well, you suffered through all this, but I'm going to reward you for these hardships. To me, and here's her son, that becomes Kingwood, so. How proud can a mother be,
Yeah. Yeah, you could do better. It's always something with some parents. But that's something that I always kind of like look back on is why do I know the story of Bathsheba is important to kind of illustrate something that David was going through, but ultimately we get Solomon, the next king, out of this situation. Was that by design?
We're also gonna get Jesus out of that situation.
Yeah.
We also got Jesus out of the, Rahab situation.
Yeah. So
There's lots of people with big old faults. That
Yeah.
weren't even believed in Christ.
and that's something that's it's very important to me, at least, is that through these sins and through these different situations, we get all these things that come out of it. It's like we get, when one door shuts, we get another door that opens situation. One bad thing does not make a person.
And if there weren't a lot of people with a lot of faults in Jesus, we wouldn't need Jesus. We could live as perfect people.
We wouldn't be out of Eden.
Throughout the Bible, there's always a cycle of people mistaking God's will with their will.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost a cycle. It's like David being faithful and then why have you forsaken me? Well, a lot of times the bad thing that happened to us is to give us love.
Yeah.
But it's always a cycle. We get on a road, we say, well, this is my will.
Yeah.
Well, and so I want to build on that a little bit, Stan, too, because I think I also go back to the fact that God never asked for a temple, right? God never asked for a temple to be built. This was very much something that was placed, like, I think part of the human side of what David wanted, because what they see is they felt as if God was theirs and theirs alone. God has given us the promised land, and so let's make sure we have a spot for God to be, when God's been like, I'm everyone's God, right? And it was this idea of, okay, it might be a little bit of a shift that based off what people wanted in a temple. But I think God was wanting to show, and later on with the fall of the temple and everything else, like, that's not what's needed.
God was willing to allow it, but he didn't be.
Right.
So that's something I want you all to kind of think about is that cycle and this repetition of those sinning, and even though that they have sinned, we get good things that come away from it. And ultimately, one of those things is Jesus. And kind of understanding that in our own lives, sometimes when we have to make mistakes, we have to learn from it. And that not always is it going to be this trust and this praise of God. It's going to be fear. It's going to be torment sometimes. And that we have to kind of go about into the motions and realize that there is a cycle, there is seasons of our lives that are going to change, and it's not forever. So thank you for coming to class today. We got about 2 minutes before we go. So if you have any questions, let me know. But thanks for coming with us.